Good evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock, so we are going to get started. My name is Kira Moog, and I'm the Family Engagement Specialist here at OPI. This will be our 7th community meeting this year, and in this meeting, we will be talking about House Bill 352, Early Literacy Intervention. If you have a question during the meeting, please raise your hand or type it into the text box, and as we have breaks and pauses, we will try to get those answered. Now, I would like to introduce Elsie Arnson, our state superintendent.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for spending a few moments with us about a very important topic. This is about making sure that our children have an opportunity in a very young, early age, all the way to 3rd grade, to have reading, literacy being recognized. These are students of all abilities. These are students in public school. These are students pre-public school, in other words, that jumpstart opportunity. And also, these are for children that are cared for in education in a homeschool setting. So let's just go ahead and jump in. Kira, back to you.
All right, thank you, Elsie. Now I'd like to introduce Rob Stutz, our Deputy Superintendent, as well as Chief Legal Counsel here at OPI. And Rob will be going through each bill tonight and answering your questions. Thank you, Rob.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our Parent Night discussion. This is the 7th in a series that we've had talking about legislation. And what I'd like to do is just walk you through initially where you can even find the bill. Christy has posted the link directly to the bill in the chat, but I wanted to make you aware that these parent conversations that we have, if you go to our website, that's opi.mt.gov, and you go to our parent resources link, you can see a whole series of meetings that we've had every month and gone through different legislation. We don't have the next meeting posted yet, but after the new year, we will be continuing this series. And I guess that's my little transition to say happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We are holding this one a bit earlier in the month than we typically do because the holiday season is upon us. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. The bills can be found by going to the Montana legislative website. That's ledge.mt.gov. You can go to laws and bills, and you can just look up any bill that you want. We're looking at House Bill 352 today. Type that in or click on the link that Christy posted in the chat, and you can get to the page with this bill. On this page, you can also see that this bill had pretty broad support, especially in the House, where it was supported on 3rd reading 77-20. So that's pretty broad support across Montana. It was a little bit closer in the Senate, but nonetheless, it passed and it is now a law here in Montana. And what an opportunity this law is. This legislation provides the really critical support for young students in learning reading development. There are 3 facets to this bill that are of particular interest. This intervention can be a classroom-based program, a home-based program, or what we call the Jumpstart program. Each of those has slightly different requirements for eligibility and how those programs are funded, but and we'll walk right through it. But I wanted to point out that this is a collaboration between the Montana Office of Public Instruction and the Montana Board of Public Education. You can see right in the bill that the Board of Public Education has some of the authority for making the determinations about which children are eligible under these programs and what evaluation methodology will be used. Those are both determined by the Board of Public Education. I also want to point out that this is optional. A school district may provide eligible children with those interventions. And so if you're out there and wondering whether this is an option at your school district, then I encourage you to talk with your trustees to ensure that the early intervention program is available to in your school district.
It was satisfying enough for me. The line is that the line? My goodness.
We're getting a little feedback or a little crosstalk on one of the channels, one of the participants. The other thing I wanted to point out, the superintendent of public instruction provides the support for these programs. And so we've hired 2 early literacy intervention specialists to assist in the implementation of this program. So right now, OPI is working really closely with the Board of Public Education to outline what the evaluation methodology would look like, what instruments and what programs might be available through this early literacy intervention program. So the first program we're going to talk about is the classroom-based program. This program is limited to students 4 and older who have not completed kindergarten. So this is really for the under 5 crowd, or the really young crowd that may need some early literacy intervention. And that is classroom-based, so that would take place in the school. The second program is the home-based program, and that's for students who are in that young age, but continuing all the way for those who have not yet completed 2nd grade. And that home-based program doesn't have to be provided in the school. That's provided, as the name would suggest, at home. And then the third part of the program that I want to talk about is the Jumpstart program. The Jumpstart program is available during the summer months, between school year months, for students who would be entering into kindergarten, 1st or 3rd grade. And each of these components, the classroom-based, the home-based, and the Jumpstart program, have different funding mechanisms that the legislature has provided for. The classroom-based program is going to be calculated into the A and B, that's the average number belonging calculation for the school district. And so students who are involved in that program, the school district would receive the funding through that A and B calculation. For students who are in the home-based program, up to $1,000 a year is eligible to support that home-based program. I should point out that that $1,000 is not a direct payment to families. That's up to $1,000 to the school district to, to the vendor to provide the home-based program. So that's for those students who are running it through their home. And then finally, the Jumpstart program allows those students to be counted for quarter time enrollment for A and B purposes. And so that would be provided, the funding mechanism would be provided through the school district receiving a 1/4 A and B calculation. And one of the really interesting things about this program, and I'm going to hop forward just a little bit. One of the things that I think is really interesting is that 1/4 time enrollment is in addition to the A and B enrollment that's calculated for the regular school year, since the Jumpstart program takes place during the between school years. And so that allows up to 1 1/4 time enrollment of a student for A and B purposes. That's the funding mechanism for school districts for these students who are in the Jumpstart program.
So Rob, I'm going to stop you just for just maybe to start some discussion here. So you're telling me that in the Jumpstart, which is a student that could be the age of 4 all the way age up to 3rd grade, correct? Would be how do they get enrolled in the school? Because this is prior to the school year beginning, the Jumpstart program. Where is that acknowledgement that happening in order for the funding to flow. And maybe I'm in the weeds too much because we flow dollars out to school based on last year's enrollment. So if I have a brand new student that we don't even recognize before has moved into the district, how are we going to flow the dollars in a manner to schools to recognize that current enrollment?
Sure, Superintendent, and I'm not going to say that you're in the weeds too much, but that is a very detailed school funding question. And the way that the statute addresses it is that it allows the students to be counted quarter time for purposes of the A and B calculations. So that would just go toward the count. It wouldn't necessarily allow free payment for participation in the program. Instead, it would add that students jumpstart participation into the A and B calculation, which would result in the financing the subsequent year.
Okay, so we have work to do. I'll just say that. That's why we've hired some great people to implement this bill, to make sure that families are recognized, more importantly, that the school is recognized through the funding formula.
Right, we've got our staff who is providing the support, and there's also a reporting requirement where the Office of Public Instruction will be reporting to the legislature the progress on the early literacy program.
Excellent.
There are a few other parts of the bill that I want to highlight specifically regarding the program before I go back a little bit and talk about some related pieces. But one thing I wanted to show you is that there is financing built into the bill, and I apologize for scrolling through and getting everybody dizzy. But there's up to $1.5 million for the program that's available. And if you recall, the funding per student for the home-based program, this is money for the home-based literacy program, is limited to $1,000, up to $1,000 per student. And so there potentially would be a limit on the number of students across the state who would be able to participate in the home-based program, because 1.5 million divided by $1,000 is about exactly 1,500 kids. And so there is some limitation on that, and the legislation does provide that if the school district, if the funding gets capped out, then the school districts will have to accept participation on a first come, first served basis. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, is that there is a financial limit on the number of participants. I'll also point out, though, that the legislature expressed their intent for there to be ongoing funding for this program from biennium to biennium. So that's a message to future legislators about the importance of this program. The other thing that I want to point out is that this legislation becomes effective in July of 2024. So this isn't a program that's currently available. Rather, the Office of Public Instruction is working with the Board of Public Education to make sure that this program is up and running for next school year. And so we're fortunate to have Christy on this call. Christy is one of the OPI employees who's working closely with the Board of Public Education on the implementation of this legislation. Christy, I'm going to turn over to you in just a second. I just want to highlight one more part about the bill that there may be some questions about, and that is back here on page 6 of the bill. So again, I apologize for running quickly through and making this all a big blur. The legislation defined an exceptional circumstance that allows a student to be admitted to a school before age 5 or after age 19. And for purposes of the early literacy program, they put that right in here. The child is admitted to an early literacy program. But I wanted to point out that this also might affect other programs, and in particular, under 5 enrollment of students. The legislation recognizes that under 5s can be admitted to a kindergarten program under exceptional circumstances, can be admitted to a preschool program, can be admitted after age 19, but it does define, for purposes of counting those kindergarten program for the under 5, the kindergarten program as being the 1-year program immediately preceding entry into 1st grade. So there had been some out in the field in past years. There had been some enrollment of students who were under 5 into a kindergarten program. And if that student didn't complete kindergarten, they would repeat the next year and they would still be counted for A and B purposes. And I want to point out that in addition to this legislation establishing and addressing the early literacy intervention program, the legislature also clarified that early enrollment of a kindergarten student as an exceptional circumstance can only be claimed for 1 year, and that's the year prior to the child's entry into 1st grade. So if a child has to repeat, then that A and B count, that student wouldn't be counted for A and B purposes. So there's a little bit more to this legislation than just early literacy intervention, but really the focus of this legislation is on establishing that program. And with that in mind, if there are any questions, I'm happy to field them. And if not, then I'll turn it over to Christy to talk a little bit about how the implementation is going with the Board of Public Education. Are there any questions?
So far, Rob, we haven't had any questions come up in the chat and no one has raised their hand.
All right, thank you, Kira. Christy?
All right, thank you, Rob. This legislation is, as Rob pointed out, one of the main legislative intents is this collaboration between not just the Office of Public Instruction and the Board of Public Education, but the Office of Public Instruction and districts and school and students, schools, educators, parents. And so this real collaboration between families and schools is at the heart of this legislation, and it's exciting to be part of that work. So here at the OPI, we have been working closely with the Board of Public Education. They have established an early literacy council. And that early literacy council is right now has presented an information item for the board to take action in January on the evaluation methodologies. They've put a proposal forth. So we are tracking that. We have seeded a early literacy collaborative here at the OPI, and that collaborative has met 2 times. They have looked carefully at what the Board of Public Education is proposing and tracking that and understanding how we will be able to support and implement that, those evaluation methodologies when April, May, and June come around, and that is the time for those schools to use those evaluation methodologies to identify eligible students for this early literacy intervention program. At one of our, actually our new full-time staff members working on this bill is actually on the call. Jackie Roning is on the call. She's our early literacy coordinator. She's helping to implement this bill as well. And we also have Kimberly Evans. She is our data and research analyst that will be helping support schools in analyzing their data and making instructional decisions on that data as well. So that is some of where we are with the implementation pieces. And we're very excited to be, we have one of our members was on our collaborative. It was a member of the council at the Board of Public Education. So we have that crossover. We know the Board of Public Education right now is looking at updating administrative rules for those early learning standards, and that we will be looking at those changes and understanding those as well when as they're working on those changes. And I think I see a question in the chat. Kira, is that,
Yes, so Teresa Baldry asked, what about special education students who may need to repeat kindergarten due to the IEP? So Rob, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I could take a stab at it for sure. But that's also a good segue for me to introduce Lucy Belts. She is the exact person here at OPI who works with early learning and special education. So good to see you, Lucy. If you have any thoughts on this, feel free to jump in. But the statute is pretty clear. It doesn't address whether those services will be provided under the IEP. Clearly, if the IEP requires the provision of services. The statute that I was talking about earlier, that I was pointing to earlier, only regards the calculation for A and B purposes. And so for A and B purposes, they are counted on in the kindergarten program in the final year before the first grade. But still, there's that obligation under IDEA to provide those special education services. And I see Lucy nodding her head. Feel free if you have anything else you'd like to add, but that's how I read the statute.
Yes, thank you, Rob. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy. I'm the early learning and special education specialist. So I focus on our children ages 3 to 5 who are entering the IEP process and having their preschool services determined by their IEP team. So I think one good thing to think about and remember as we're going through this process of serving 4-year-olds in the public school system is that IEP services are just that. They're services for the child or the student. And as IEP team, excuse me, that was a mouthful, are making decisions for LRE. They need to be considering where the student is currently placed at the time of evaluation and what the least restrictive environment is for that particular child based on their needs and where their services are best, where it's best suited to provide those services to the student. So thinking more of special education services as just that, services, rather than a place. So Teresa, I'm not sure if that completely covers your question, but when it comes to kindergarten and where the child is best suited for placement, that would be an IEP team decision.
Lucy, if you could put your contact information into the chat, that would be great for any afterthoughts that might also come. I think there's another one or clarification more. Thanks, Kara.
Yes, so Teresa had a follow-up question. She said for A and B, would the special education student not count if the IEP team chose for the student to repeat kindergarten?
I'll hop in here. So for A and B purposes, the kindergarten program is defined by this legislation as being the program for the 1 year immediately preceding the child's entry into first grade. And so it would seem that the reading of this legislation would define that kindergarten program as being a 1 year program. I don't know, I hadn't considered, and I apologize, whether they're under Part C, IDEA Part C, if there was an under 5 who was enrolled in the kindergarten program and because of the IEP had to repeat. It seems to me that there would be the Part C funding for that. But I may be wrong. I see Lucy shaking her head. But in any event, looking specifically to the question about A and B funding, the A and B calculation is based on the 1 year preceding first grade. And so that's for A and B purposes, how that student would be counted.
So there is another question in the chat. Kayla asked, is there going to be more advanced training or a different degree needed to teach younger groups of children? Early childhood degrees and elementary degrees are different. As someone going to school to be a teacher, I'm interested in what you would need to teach this class.
Mhm. Boy, I'll take this one then. I think you're spot on. We want the expert, especially in something that is critical, that is a directive from the legislature. I was a classroom teacher, fifth grade, and I know I had a deficit in some of the things that were given to me as state standards. So I sought professional development, but I think you're spot on in saying, where will that be housed? Whether it's in an in-service program or if it is going to be something that we can offer point of free. So for all teachers across our state, we have a functional portal that's called the Learning Hub. And we could definitely build classes that are virtual where those credits would be then, and I call them credits, they would be given then towards your renewal units for your next recertification. So I really like these conversations right now because they're looking at the implementation in a manner that's very, very broad so that we can do the best thing for our children. So great question. When it comes to post-secondary and the deans asking this, Christy, this is something we can put, on in their ear that we have now doubled down on this and with the legislature's intent as stated in the law to fund this further through than this past biennium, to make sure that they also recognize program development as they build our Montana teachers. So great question.
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent. I agree. And Lucy put in the chat that we do have the pre-K to third teaching certificates available. So that would be in, that would help support for these targeted interventions. And again, you touched on this too, Superintendent, in thinking about we're moving forward with a standards revision in English language arts. And those we will be definitely considering those early literacy supports within those standards that will be aligning to this as well, again, to help support all teachers to be prepared for this as well. So that touches on that. Another point I wanted to discuss as part of our implementation process right now, Rob discussed the home-based program. We are preparing a request for projects. That's an RFP process that we are writing for vendors to submit quotes to the Office of Public Instruction to meet the needs of this home-based program as outlined in this legislation, and that it takes some time to go through that process here at the state level, but we are in the process of doing that, and that request will hopefully go out in February, and we'll be then getting those vendors coming back in with their ideas, and we'll be able to make selections from that we will then recommend to the Board of Public Education, and the Board of Public Education will ultimately decide on what that home-based program is going to be. I am going to also put my email in the chat. If anyone has questions on this, please reach out for any of the implementation or other questions. I will put that in the chat as well. Are there any other questions this evening?
No, and just for reference for anyone who is in the chat, Jackie Ronning added that there is a series of foundational literacy classes on the hub that she highly recommends to anyone involved with the early literacy. They're free, so they're the perfect place to begin. So as of right now, we don't have any more questions in the chat.
Well, thank you everybody for coming out tonight. Appreciate the participation, and over to you, Superintendent, for final thoughts.
Thank you. I appreciate, again, your discussion. It was very simple. When the legislation happens, and I was a legislator for so many years, 12 years, we get into a hot pocket in the legislature, and we're bound by proponents and opponents and all of that. Sometimes we don't get to hear and understand the implementation of this. The reason for these community discussions is exactly that. Your questions are helping us aid to make sure that we implement what the legislature has given this agency. But more importantly, your voice is so important so that we have an opportunity to help our kids across our state. Thank you so much for spending time with us. There'll be another one that will be happening in January, and we'll move it all the way through the rest of the year. These discussions are so important. Blessings to all. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and Happy New Year. Blessings.